Um, the Haftorah this week is very straightforward. It's a story. It doesn't need much, doesn't require much commentary. So I may be out of a job this morning, but we'll see if I can find something to talk about. In any case, the Haftarah is about the story of Samson. Samson was one of the most interesting judges of the Jewish people. Judges, I mean that he operated in the period before the kings. So when the Jewish people entered Israel for about 400 years, it was a period called the period of the judges. Some were more um, great than others. And basically, the book of Judges is a cycle where the people were divided into 12 tribes. So there wasn't one central government. And at some point, the people would stray after their idol worship because that was in style. And then God would send some oppressor to come oppress them, either the king of Canaan or the king. Later, you'll see now we're talking about the Philistines, and they would enter the scene and oppress the Jewish people. Eventually, the Jewish people will cry out to God, and God would send somebody to create a leader to raise an army and remove the oppressor. And that's the cycle. That was over the 400 years of until the era of the kings. That's the cycle that takes place. You read about it in the book of Judges. The last judge we read about is Samson, Shimshon, and he is a fascinating, colorful personality. Um, we're not going to tell the whole story. We read about his birth today, and he's unique and different than the other prophets in a few ways. One of the ways that he's different is that he is very independent. Most judges, when they have to fight the oppressor, they raise an army and they lead the army. This guy, he doesn't do armies. He's very, how do I say it? He's alone, he's independent, and he's more like guerrilla warfare. And he also, and therefore he doesn't succeed in removing the threat of the Philistines. But as we will see in this parsha, in this Haftorah, it's that God says, the prophet says, Hu Yachel, he will begin. He begins the process. And we know the story, if you know the story of Samson, and in short, his downfall is that he strays after the Philistine woman in plural, at the end a woman in particular, but a woman in plural. So he's always dealing with that, with his attraction to the Philistine, to the girls of the Philistines. And the other issue is, and that's what we're going to read about today, and that's the connection to the parsha, is that his power, the source of his power comes from the fact that he is a Nazir. A Nazir means, as we read in this week's parsha, a Nazir is a form of a vow where the person takes a vow not to drink wine and not to cut his hair, which we'll discuss. And that's the root of his power. And when his wife, the Philistine wife, pressures him, finally he goes and he tells her the root of his power. And then the Philistines come. We know the bitter end. The Philistines come. They cut his hair, and then he loses his power. And that's almost the end of the story. So we have to really think about the institution of the Nazir to figure out what's the power of Samson and why that was so critical to his story. And we'll read the story as well. But just to think about the institution of the Nazir for a moment. So in this week's parsha, we read a commandment. The commandment is as follows. If somebody takes an oath and he says, I'm going to be a Nazir, Nazir literally means separated. I want to be separated from the rest of the population in the sense I want to be more holy. And what does that mean? It means he doesn't drink wine. Wine represents, in that society, they didn't have any, I don't know, what didn't they have? They didn't have a lot of pleasures. They didn't have, what do people like to drink today for pleasure? They didn't have scotch. They didn't have hot cocoa. So wine was the drink that you indulge in. You had water or wine. So wine represents the indulgence. So a person says, I'm taking an oath and I'm not going to indulge myself with wine. Also, I'm not going to cut my hair. If you don't cut your hair, it means you're not going to groom. So you're not focused on your external appearances, and you're not focused on pleasure, on wine. Also, a person cannot become impure with touch a dead person. But as we will see later, that did not apply to Samson. Again, that represents that I'm like a priest. The priest was not supposed to touch a dead person. And in general, it's a sign of I'm separating and I'm becoming more holy. And there's a whole system of how you can do this. And if I do this, I have to keep the vow. And usually the vow is for a period of time, 30 days, 60 days, whatever, however long I make it, a minimum of 30 days. And then once the period of the vow is over, Then there are offerings that you're supposed to bring in the temple, and would cut his hair, and there's a whole ceremony that would take place. That's what we read in this week's parsha. Hence the connection to the Haftorah, which is the story of a very famous Nazir, which was Samson. Why was he so famous? Because his Nazirite was unique. He was supposed to be a Nazir for his entire life, unlike most of the Nazir was supposed to be just for a period. Okay, fine. So that's the connection to the parsha. So even before we read the story, we want to ask a question. What is, and we'll discuss this tomorrow as well, what is the attitude of the Torah toward the Nazir? We make this institution, but is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Does the Torah want us to do this? Does the Torah want us to take a vow and say, I'm not going to drink wine, I'm going to separate from pleasures, and I'm not going to groom, I'm not going to cut my hair? Is that something holy? Is that something good? So here we have a very interesting and confusing indications, because on one hand, the Torah explicitly says in this week's parsha that a Nazir is holy, kadosh, he's holy. On the other hand, the sages say that it's a problem. It's not the right thing to do. And how do they find it? They find it in the verse, in the story, in the biblical story, in the biblical laws, because what happens is after the Nazir, the period of the Nazir concludes, the Nazir would have to bring a few offerings. And one of the offerings he would bring is a sin offering. So the Talmud says, sin offering, what kind of sin did it perform? This Nazir was on a great level. He was so holy. Why do you have to bring a sin offering for being too holy? And the Talmud says, it's a sin. Why is it a sin? Because, like the Talmud says, it's enough what God prohibited for you. There's 365 prohibitions in the Torah. That's enough. You don't have to add prohibitions. You don't have to add and say, I'm not going to drink wine. So the Talmud seems to say, based on what the Torah says, that the Nazir would bring a sin offering. So on one hand, we have an indication that it's a bad thing. On the other hand, we say it's a good thing. It's holy. It's additional holiness. So if it's additional holiness, why is it a bad thing? And the answer is as follows. The answer is that this is not what the Torah wants of, this is not the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation is to sanctify the world and not to escape it. However, the Torah recognizes that there are individuals that for a certain period of time, that may be the right path, either because they want to be more holy or because they need extra protection. And we'll see that's really Samson. Samson has deep struggles within himself with the passions, and therefore he has to go to the other extreme, and he has to completely separate himself from wine and other forms of pleasure, as we see in the story that he is a challenged individual. So in other words, even though this is not the preferred path, but for some individuals, for certain periods of time, this is what they should do as an exception to the rule. Be too holy as an exception to the rule, but that's not the goal, and therefore the goal is to go back to normal life for most people, not for Samson, however. So this is a very interesting concept where on one hand you say this is not the goal of life, but for some people it's necessity. And for some people, it's actually a good thing. So for example, should you drink alcohol? Well, the Torah says that, at least the rabbis say, you should sanctify Shabbat with a cup of wine. Yeah, but what happens if it's bad? Wine is not good for me because for whatever reason, it does not have a good impact on me and controls me, I don't control it. Then don't drink wine. Then become a Nazir. But that's a form of, if it's going to bring me down, then I should not engage in it. But that's a metaphor for in general. In general, the attitude is engagement. But some people, either because they're super spiritual or because they're super challenged, have to separate from temptation. And wine is the symbol of temptation. And not that that's the goal, but again, for these individuals, it is the right, it's the right path, at least temporarily. So that's the background of the institution. That's the Torah's attitude to it. And it's mixed. It's not the goal for everybody. It's not the preferred goal, but for some people, as an exception, it may be the right thing. And now this helps us understand what Samson's life is. Samson is an individual that has a lot of potential, a lot of power, a lot of strength. He has no fear, as we will read, and he does a lot of great things. But sometimes those same characteristics that make him so brave and make him so powerful to be able to begin to rebel against the Philistines and start helping the Jews, those same character traits are also really his downfall. He can't channel the passion, or he has trouble channeling the passion. And as we see at the end, he follows the Torah says he follows his eyes. He looks for external physical beauty, and that's why he ends up with his wife Delilah, and that's the downfall. So we see he has a lot of qualities, but he's also challenged. And as we will see, when the angel tells the mother that he is the one that Samson needs to be a Nazarite his whole life, that's an indication that this child, because he's troubled, needs that extra protection. And trouble doesn't mean trouble. Trouble means he's got abundant energy. And in that sense, Samson does some things that are very good. But there's no black and white, certainly not with Samson, certainly not in the context of being a Nazir. So that's a little bit of an introduction to the story. The story itself is straightforward. We'll read the entire story. And then I'm going to just make a few points just to point out a few details to get you thinking. Other than that, there's not much to say. The story speaks for itself. But any questions, comments, if you want to join in at this point, wonderful. If you want to join in after we read the actual story, that's also wonderful. And if you want to just relax and not ask any questions, that's not as good, but also wonderful. Okay, so we're Judges chapter 13. He's not the greatest judge, but he's the most colorful judge, and therefore there are 4 chapters about Samson in the book of Judges, which is only about 20 chapters. So it's almost a quarter of the book. And he's the only judge that we read about from birth. You have his whole basically biography from birth until the end when he is killed prematurely. In any case, here we go. And there was one man from Sarah, from the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoach, and his wife was barren and had not borne. In the Bible, if your mother was not barren, you have no hope. All the great people were born to barren women. So if as soon as you read this, a woman can't give birth, oh, now you know there's a story coming. If your mother just had no problem conceiving, you're not going to turn out to be anything special. That's just the pattern that you have in the Bible. Of course, I'm only half joking because it represents that the people that need divine intervention is this sign that if a miracle happens and they give birth, it's because they have a unique mission. So is with Isaac, the beginning of the Jewish people, and so with Samson in this case, as well with Samuel, which is the next leader after Samson, but he's in his own book, the book of Samuel. Okay, next. And an angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Behold, now you are barren and have not borne, and you shall conceive and bear a son." So the angel comes to the woman. We don't know her name. It's very interesting. We'll talk about that later. He comes to her, says, "You're barren, you're going to give birth. You're going to become pregnant, you'll give birth." However, he gives her a list of requirements. Number 4, consequently, beware now, and do not drink wine or strong drink, and do not eat any unclean thing. What does it mean, any unclean thing? It's a question, but according to many commentators, it means don't eat anything that the Nazir is not allowed to eat. For example, a grape. Why? Because you shall conceive and bear a son, and a razor shall not come upon his head. For a Nazarite to God shall the lad be from the womb, and he will begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Okay, let's continue. Verse 6. And the woman came and said to her husband, saying, "A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God, very awesome. And I did not ask him from where he was, and his name he did not tell me. And he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. And now do not drink wine and strong drink, and do not eat any unclean thing. For a Nazarite to God shall the lad be from the womb until the day of his death." And Manoach entreated the Lord and said, "Please, O Lord, the man of God whom you sent, let him come now again to us and teach to us what we shall do to the lad that will be born." He needs more information. Very interesting. God sends the angel again, but no new information. So we'll talk about that as well. Number 9. And God hearkened to the voice of Manoach, and the angel of God came again to the woman, and she was sitting in the field, and Manoach, her husband, was not with her. So again, he comes to her, not to him. And the woman hurried and ran and told her husband, and she said to him, "Behold, there has appeared to me the man that came to me on that day." The guy is back. Now I'm at verse 11. And Manoach arose and went after his wife, and he came to the man and said to him, "Are you the man that spoke to the woman?" And he said, "I am." And Manoach said, "Now your word shall come forth. What shall be the rule for the lad? and his doing. So your promise will become fulfilled. The child will be born. What will we do to him? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoach, of all that I said to the woman, shall she beware. From all that comes from the grapevine, she shall not eat. And wine or strong drink she may not drink. And any unclean thing she may not eat. All that I commanded her shall she observe. And Manoach said to the angel of the Lord, let us take you in now and prepare for you a kid goat. He doesn't realize that it's an angel. He thinks it's a prophet. So he says, can we invite you for dinner? We have a kid goat. We'll have roast. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoach, if you take me in, I will not eat of your bread. And if you will make a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord. For Manoach did not know that he was an angel of the Lord. So basically the angel says, if you're going to invite me for dinner, I'm not coming. You want to offer thanks? Don't offer thanks to me. Offer thanks to God. And Manoach said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? That when your word will come, we may do you honor. Okay, so what's your name? And then we can honor you. So now I'm at 18. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you presently ask me for my name, since it is hidden? We know the angels, the commentaries explain, angels don't have any names because their name is defined. They don't have their own identity. Their name is just that they're on a mission. So depending on the mission, that's the name that they receive depending on that mission, but that mission will change. So Manoach took the kid goat. In other words, he was going to invite the prophet for dinner, but that prophet said he doesn't want to come, so he offers it to God, and offered upon the rock to the Lord. And the angel did wondrously, and Manoach and his wife looked on. And it was when the flame went up from upon the altar toward heaven, and the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. And Manoach and his wife looked on, and they fell on their faces on the ground, because they were in shock. They see that the angel is going up to God. And the angel of the Lord did not continue to appear to Manoach and his wife. Then Manoach knew that he was an angel of the Lord. And Manoach said to his wife, we shall surely die because we have seen God. It's too amazing. If we saw such an awesome image, we're certainly going to die. But his wife said to him, if the Lord wanted to kill us, he would not have received from our hand a burnt offering and a meal offering, and he would not have shown us all these things. And at this time, he would not let us hear such things as these, right? God didn't do all of this just to kill us. If he brought us to this point and gave us this promise and accepted the offering and gave us and showed us this awesome scene where the angel can go back to the Lord up in smoke, then God would not have killed us. And the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the lad grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to come to him at times in the camp of Dan, between Sarah and Eshtaol. And if you want to read all about fascinating stories of Samson, there's another 3 chapters in the book of Judges, and there's a lot of drama. So that's basically the story. I have just a few points to point out. As I mentioned, it's very straightforward, or at least on the surface, it's very straightforward. But what exactly is there's some subtleties that we could discuss. But if anyone has comments, questions, please share. Otherwise, like I said, we continue. Okay, so we mentioned initially. We mentioned the big idea. The big idea is he's a complicated figure. He needs the outlet of the Nazarite, the institution of the Nazarite, to keep him channeled, because he is prone to temptation because of his great passion. But again, that passion also works for good, and that passion also helps him do the right thing. So I just want to make a few points, just one little cute point about one word, and then another few points that is really one point. But the first thing, you missed it in the English, verse 5. So the angel comes to her and he says that don't drink any wine, don't eat anything impure, because you shall conceive and bear a son, and a razor shall not come upon his head. Now, the Hebrew word for razor is morah. Morah is a strange word for razor. In other words, to cut the hair. And what's the root of razor? So the commentaries say, well, the word morah could either mean fear, or it could also come from the word to throw. We say in the song of the crossing of the sea, Sus v'racho yarav hayam, God threw the horse and its rider into the sea. So how do you get from razor to throwing or fear? So the rabbis have the commentaries have two interpretations. One interpretation is when you say fear, the reason why a razor, this is almost funny, but the reason why a razor is called fear, because the hear is afraid of the razor. If you're here, you're afraid of the razor because the razor can chop you down. Another interpretation is the razor throws the hair to the ground. That's the other meaning of morah, to throw. Because when you cut, the hair falls to the ground, so the razor is throwing the hair to the ground. Wonderful. Now I ask you a question, why can't you just say razor? Right? We have this all roundabout way to say fear and throwing. So one interpretation, a beautiful interpretation is morah lo yaleh rosho. You can say a razor shall not come upon his head. You can also say fear will not go upon his head. So long as he doesn't have cut his hair, this child has nothing to be afraid of the Philistines. And that's why we use a word for razor that also implies fear, because what the angel is also telling her is that the source of his strength is the hair. And as long as he has the hair, he has nothing to be afraid of. So that's one point. That's just a point that turns out to be the story of his life. It's all alluded to in that one word that includes both. Okay. Another point is you want to look at the relationship between Manoach and his wife. Manoach is the guy with the name. The husband has the name. The wife does not have a name. We don't know her name. It's very strange. The wife of Manoach. That's how she's called. It's not like the Torah is afraid to say a woman's name. The next judge, like I said, the next leader is Shmuel, is Samuel, and we read all about his mother Hannah. And here we don't have the name. Also, what's interesting is that here, usually the barren women in the Torah are not passive. They usually pray to God. Read about it in Samuel, the next one. It's very, very clear how she goes to the temple and she cries to God. Here, they're very passive. It's almost like they're not anticipating a child. They don't want a child, or they gave up. Whatever the case is, they're very passive. So the woman is passive. The woman is not even named. But make no mistake, the book, the prophet, the book of Judges goes out of its way to highlight that she was far superior to her husband in understanding what's taking place here. And we could show it in a few different places, but also if you see what she tells her husband, she doesn't really tell everything. She censors some of the words because she doesn't think he's ready to understand it. But just as an introduction, before I go to some of the details, as an introduction, this again comes from the Abarbanel, and the Abarbanel says, why does the prophet come to the mother and not to the father? Well, he gives one practical answer, because a lot of the laws pertain to the mother. She should not drink any wine, and she should not eat anything that the Nazir cannot eat during the period of pregnancy. So that's a technical thing. We have to go to the woman because the woman, she has to know what to do. But even the second time, when the husband asks God to send the prophet again, the woman already knows what's going to happen. So why can't he go straight to the man? Right? It says, even the second time, verse 8, he says, and the Manoach entreated the Lord and said, please, O Lord, the man of God whom you sent, let him come now again to us and teach us what shall we do to the lad what shall we do to the lad that will be born? God, verse 9, and God hearkened to the voice of Manoach, and the angel of God came again to the woman, and she was sitting in the field, and Manoach, her husband, was not with her. In verse 8, the husband asks, let God come to us, in the plural. In reality, the angel goes to her, not to him. So it can't just be because she needs to know what to do, because she already knows what to do. She already heard it directly from the prophet. What's so bad? What's so terrible if the prophet will come to both of them the second time? So the Abarbanel says another reason why the prophet comes to her, because she is much more spiritually refined. She's much more spiritually developed. She understands what's happening. He is not on that level, and therefore the angel would not come to her. So where do you see this? So you see a few points. First of all, it's very clear. It's the contrast. Everything the husband does, which you're not supposed to do to an angel, the woman doesn't do the first time. Right? She doesn't invite him to a house to eat. She realizes it's an angel. She doesn't invite him to eat. She doesn't ask him his name. We already know that in the book of Genesis, when Jacob asks the angel his name, the angel says, I'm sorry, angels don't have no names. I can't tell you my name. And also, these are the two things. She doesn't invite him in. She doesn't ask him his name, because she understands what she sees. She understands that he's an angel, and therefore she is at a higher spiritual level, and therefore the angel comes to her, as opposed to him. Even when he's experiencing the revelation of the angel, he is still oblivious. He's still inviting him for dinner, and he still doesn't realize that it's an angel until when? Until he actually sees the miracle in front of his eyes. Right? If it's very striking. If you look at the verse, look at verse 20. And it was when the flame went up from upon the altar toward heaven, and the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame to the altar, and Manoach and his wife looked on, and then they fell on the head, on their faces to the ground. And the angel of the Lord did not continue to appear to Manoach and his wife. Then Manoach knew that he was an angel of the Lord. Only after the angel went up in smoke, and he didn't see him anymore. And you see the contrast. It keeps saying him and his wife, they both fall to the ground. It doesn't say then they knew that he was an angel. The woman knew he's an angel from day one, which is why you see how she reacts different than him. And she doesn't invite him to eat. She doesn't ask him his name, and she's not surprised when he goes up. She's in awe, but she's not. It's not that then she finds out that he's an angel. And then what's also interesting is the response. Manoach thinks we're going to die. We saw a revelation. When he finally realizes that what he saw was a revelation, he says we're going to die. She has the intellectual and spiritual maturity to understand, no, it doesn't mean we're going to die. To the contrary, it means we have a mission. It means God wants us here, and it means that we have a purpose, but we're not going to die. So you see here that the verse is going out of its way to explain the superiority of the mother of Samson to her husband in this process of revelation. So that's just a point, to point to see the details of what's happening within the story. But of course, the big picture is that, and this is what a lot of scholars are writing about. They say, look, if you look at all the Near Eastern cultures, they all have giants, and Samson was sort of this giant figure, a guy who's not afraid, and he goes in and he wreaks havoc amongst the Philistines. What all those stories have in common is that those giants are half gods, or usually it's God having cohabiting with a woman and giving birth to a child who's sort of half god or maybe becomes a god. So you have this in all the mythologies of the Near East. This is the contrast. Here we say no. The child is not God. The child is a natural child born from a father and mother, not from the angel. And the source of his power is following God's commandments of the Nazarite. And when he loses, when he does not follow the commandment, he loses his power. So it's giving. So some people would read the story as sort of a contrast to all the other stories and all the other faiths in the region, saying a human being is not God, and the human being's power, this comes from God, and he maintains his power to the extent that he fulfills the commandment of God. But this is basically a story, not the way it's written is a story that is here to sort of shift our focus away from the pagan stories and think about how the Bible will tell a story differently, and emphasize that the power of Samson comes specifically from Hashem. But of course, he is not Hashem. He is not divine. He is not sort of a part. He's not even a mix of the divine and the human. He is just a natural child born, and his power comes from heeding the commandments of Hashem. So that's the story in short. Like I said, there's not much to say. The story is pretty straightforward. It gets more interesting when you read the next few chapters. So that's your homework. You can read chapter 14, 15, and 16 until you get to the sad ending when they kill him. But he also kills many more Philistines when he dies than in his lifetime. Complicated story, but that's the story in short, ladies and gentlemen. And if you want to hear more about the Nazarite, come back tomorrow when we'll touch upon it when we discuss the Parsha, which is the root of where the story of the Nazarite comes from, which is, of course, the connection between the Parsha and the Haftorah. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and enjoy the beautiful spring.